So you think you want to go off grid, huh? You know, on one of the other videos I did, it kind of made it seem like maybe I didn't like solar that much and the off-grid deal, and well, that's not true. The 2 years I spent off-grid, we actually enjoyed it quite a bit. It was a steep learning curve, learning to adjust to that lifestyle. And it was back when solar panels were really expensive. It cost you like $4 to $5 per watt on the solar panels, and you know, now you can get solar panels for, you know, under $1 per watt pretty easy. So, you know, times have changed. Appliances have gotten more efficient. I think it's a lot easier to go off grid now. But I still see this pitfall that happens all the time with folks. And through this series, I'm hoping to cover some of that and maybe help some of you that possibly are already off grid or thinking about going off grid, avoid some of this and maybe fix some of the problems you already have. With my job, I take care of, I think we counted it up, like 63 sites that are completely solar. These are radio sites out in really remote locations, and you know, they're a little different than off-grid house living. Those loads are very fixed. We pretty much know what they are. You know, like for instance, we have say 2 radios per site. Each radio draws 120 milliamps on standby, and that's 24 hours a day. So 2 radios on the site, 240 milliamps, constantly all day. And you know, if you're wondering what's this milliamp thing? Well, here's a cool equation you'll want to know. You know, back when I was in tech school, the V was here. They've changed it. A lot of stuff, it's used E. They're using E now, which, you know, whatever. V's not cool. So P over VI. Easy way to remember this: penguins visiting Italy. Thought that up all on my own. You know, okay, what's that mean? The P is for watts, the V is obviously volts, and I is amperage. So to figure out your power, you take V times I, and voila, you've got your power. So for instance, one of our radios that draws about 120 milliamps at 12 volts, that's about 1.44 watts. So 2 of them is 2.88 watts. And 2.88 times 24 comes out to whatever number. That's how many watt hours we use per day on those sites. You know, and it's not a huge load. Now, when they transmit, they're actually a radio repeater, so it receives a signal coming in and then it retransmits that signal. And when that happens, that draw goes up for both radios to about 24 amps of current draw. So you can kind of figure that out. I think it comes out to like, what, 280 some watts. So, but you know, in the winter, when we don't have a lot of sun and we get our panels ice up, you know, here's a picture of one of our sites that the thing just ices up. You know, and most of our sites are like this. The solar panels will be iced up for over a month. We won't get a lot of power output. You know, we'll get a little bit, even on a sunny day like this, but it's probably only about 1/10 of what we would get if those panels weren't covered up. So, you know, we have to plan for that. We have to put a battery system in place that will support that. But, you know, on these sites, we don't have any option of turning stuff off easily remotely, so we have to kind of plan ahead for that and plan the system out that way. And it's actually pretty easy to do. You know, on the earlier video I said we plan a lot of these to last 20 days without any sun, and you can see at the low current draw and probably only a 1 to 2% duty cycle in the winter. You're asking, what's a duty cycle? Okay, duty cycle. Duty cycle is the amount of time that radio is transmitting. So in the winter, our sites don't get used nearly as heavy as they do in the summer. In the summer, those things are constantly being used. In the winter, you know, 1 to 2% duty cycle. So what's that mean? Well, you take 24 hours and times by 0.01, which would be 1%, comes out to about 24 minutes a day of transmit time, which on our sites, that's probably about right. Not all, some of them are more used, but you know, some of these really remote sites, that's probably a pretty good idea. The thing is, these sites have to be available in case something comes up, search and rescue, law enforcement stuff, whatever it's happening out in those remote locations. It has to be available when they need it. So we have to kind of plan to have those sites on the air all the time, even, you know, in the dead of winter when hardly anybody's using them, it still has to be there. Now, when we're talking about your house, things are quite a bit different, and the loads can vary quite a bit depending on the lifestyle, what you have going at that time. And this is one of the big pitfalls I see people fall into all the time when they're trying to do these off-grid systems, is they have no clue what their loads are. And so they go, you know, here's a scenario that seems to happen quite often. And I got this great deal on some used forklift batteries, and I found these used panels, and you know, I found this inverter. It's 12 volt square wave. I don't know what that means, but you know, I got a great deal on it, and I think I can power the whole house on it. Well, there's so many problems with that. We'll go into some of those as we go along, and this is going to be split up into like 3 to 4 videos because, you know, it's YouTube. People, their attention spans aren't that great. So I'm going to try and keep them around 20 minutes each. And let me say something real quick here. I've taken, I think, 3 or 4 solar classes over the years, and each one's been 3 days to a week long. And believe it or not, that was barely enough time to get all that information crammed in there. In fact, I left thinking, man, we could have spent a lot more time on some of this. So trying to cram a lot of information into 3 or 4 20-minute videos is going to be tough. I'll do my best. I'm probably going to have to gloss over some stuff that really we probably need to take a deeper look at. But if you're really interested, you know, there's some great companies out there putting on classes, and you can go spend a week at their facilities and learn a ton of information. A little disclaimer: some of the companies that produce equipment put on classes, and you got to be, you know, kind of careful. There's a lot of good information in those classes, but a lot of times it's a sales pitch. And I've been to a couple of those where, you know, there's some really good pieces of information and there's some gems you can pick out, but you got to really watch. They're trying to sell you something. So I suggest looking into some companies that are not stuck on one particular brand and they don't manufacture it. They're just wanting to share information. There's a couple of them out there that are excellent. I'll put them down in the description below, one of them at least. You know, what are some other pitfalls that can happen? One is you undersize your panels. You may think you have the perfect array and you figured out your loads and all that, but I see this happen all the time, is we undersize the arrays. And what happens in those scenarios is our batteries slowly work their way down and our array's not big enough to recover quick enough. So the batteries will get down to these low levels of charge and they just can't recover quick enough, and it's just a slow spiral, and pretty soon you're like 3 or 4 days in and your batteries are like down to nothing. Their state of charge is like at 0. And when you do that, hate to say it, you've done probably some pretty good damage to those batteries. If you get those batteries down to where their state of charge is down below that 20% level, oh man, that's tough on batteries. And I see it happen all the time with these off-grid systems. That happens, you know, and it happens this cycle over and over again where the batteries don't get a chance to fully recover, and then they go back down into that deep discharge, and you know, in 2 or 3 years you're replacing batteries. The other thing that happens all the time is undersizing your batteries. You don't figure in those temperature variables for your batteries if you don't have them in a heated environment. The other thing that happens is the wiring on the batteries, believe it or not. That can be a major factor in problems down the road. Choosing the wrong voltage for your battery bank, that's a big problem sometimes, especially when you start running a whole house on a decent sized house off of an inverter system, and you go and pick a 12 volt battery system. Man, that can be problematic. It can be done. Don't go there. Man, there are so many pitfalls you can really fall into in this. I feel like I'm playing Dig Dug. You guys in my generation, you know what Dig Dug is. So in this first part of this, the first thing we're going to do, now hey, you're thinking, man, I just want to go buy some panels and get underway here. No, no, no. Hold off on the panels. The panels will be the last part of this equation. I know you're like, why was that? Well, just bear with me. We'll figure this out. The first thing we want to figure out is what our expected loads are. And if you don't have one of these, man, you need to buy one. It's called a kilowatt meter, and invaluable tool for figuring out what your loads are on the equipment you want to use off-grid. And you just plug one of these things in, and you know, in no time you figured out what the real load is that you're looking at here. And you need to add all these up and figure out what your daily load is. And so that's going to be our first step. Now before I go into that, let me address something. Man, that last video I did on the solar stuff, I was amazed at, and I kind of knew this, but it kind of brought it back to me. You know, I lived off grid, and I knew that you solar folks are like religious about this stuff. If you think that somebody's like digging on your solar stuff, I mean, man, you just freak out. It's truly like a religion, I don't know any other way to say that. And I get it. You get invested in an idea and a system, and you know, people say you can't do that, and you're like, yeah, well, yeah, I can. So I kind of get it. But you know, if you're some of those folks that just are into the solar religion thing, well, hey, if you got a system that works for you, run with it. Have a great day. For the rest of you, let's dig into this a little bit. We need to know our loads. And remember that little equation I gave you before? If for some reason you don't have a kilowatt meter, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you've got a DC load that the kilowatt meter is not going to work with, there are some other little cool meters that you can buy for DC loads. Like this one. This is some off-brand Chinese thing. You can buy them on eBay. PowerWorks has their version. It looks identical to this, but it says PowerWorks on it. It's just a DC load meter. So if for some reason you want to do the DC stuff, there you go. But if you don't have one of these little meters, remember that little equation. If you know what voltage you're operating at, and it's more than likely if you're doing DC stuff, it's 12 volts. 12 volts times, you know, look at the item. Somewhere on there or in the manual, it'll tell you what the current draw is on it. Times the two together, boom, you've got your wattage. So with that said, let's figure out some AC loads, which later on in the series I'll kind of go into DC versus AC as far as running a house. And I'll tell you right now, if you'll probably want to go to AC, even with the inverter inefficiencies, it's still easier. I know somebody's going to say, but DC. Okay. So let's use some real basic stuff here. I've got a spreadsheet that I made that I use at work all the time. I've modified it for more of the off-grid home type situation. And I'm going to try and share that through Google Docs, and hopefully everybody can get access to it. I'll try and put a link down below. It may not show up till the next video because there's some little more tweaking I want to do on it. We'll see how quick I get this video out. Before you go buy any equipment at all, don't buy anything till we start this process and finish it. That way you know what you need to buy, and you don't waste a bunch of money, and you'll be happy with the system instead of, oh, I'm fighting this thing constantly and I hate it. So first thing, let's do this load calc. And I'm going to base it off of some stuff around my house that I've found. It's going to be a pretty simple one, kind of keep it basic for the time being. And yours will probably be, you know, a lot more stuff on it than this. Like I said, this is just for an example. So, you know, one of the things that I think we all want, some kind of fridge. Back when I was off grid, the solar was so dang expensive. We used propane fridges, and man, you bought this huge fridge, but the inside of it was only like this because the walls were like that thick, just to keep the cold in, and they were not super efficient. So, you know, today with PV costs what they are, you can run one pretty easy. So my fridge, it's like a, I don't know, 20 to 25 cubic foot French door thingy with freezer on the bottom. Not probably the most efficient fridge in the world. It's a few years old. I put a kilowatt meter on it, and averaging out through the day, it draws on average about 130 watts. And there's times when it's going through defrost and all that, it draws more. There's times it's down to like 40 watts, but on average, it averages out to about 130 watts. Okay, 130 watts average for a 24-hour day. Well, what's that come out to? That's 3.12 kilowatt hours. Okay, the next thing, I know I can't live without it anymore, is internet. So I put that thing on our internet modem, and it actually drew a little less than I figured it was going to. And I don't know if this kilowatt meter is not real accurate down at these low wattages, but it came out to averaging out about between 35 and 40 watts. So let's just go with 35 watts. So 35 watts, and yeah, if you're off grid, you can unplug this thing once in a while and save a little power, but you know, Google's our friend, and we want to access that right now. So let's just assume it's on 24 hours a day. So that's 840 watt hours, or 0.84 kilowatt hours. You know, the other thing that we all seem to like is TVs. So I put it on ours, and it's like a 55 inch, some thing that was on sale, TLC, I don't know. It was on, like I said, it's on sale. It draws, when it's on, it's about 300 watts. And say you watch it 4 hours a day. It's winter time, you can't get out much, so 4 hours a day. Well, that comes out to 1.2 kilowatt hours per day. For another example, I used our satellite receiver. On standby, it draws 28 watts, and you know that thing's sitting there all the time, so it can record DVR whenever the show comes on that you want or whatever. That's 28 watts, 24 hours a day. Yeah, at times it draws a little more, but let's just keep it simple. 28 watts. So that comes out to 0.67 kilowatt hours. And of course, we all need lights once in a while, right? And that's something that's really awesome nowadays. Is LED lights are so efficient, so much better than back when. So, you know, let's say you've got 3 lights on in the house, you know, equivalent to 3 lights on in the house, and they draw 7 watts each for 4 hours a day. So that's 21 watts. You add the 3 together, 7, 7, 7. That's 21, right? So 21 watts, 4 hours a day, and that comes out to, I had to look at my cheat sheet, 0.08 kilowatt hours per day. The next thing I threw on the list here is a stove. And if you're living off-grid, more than likely you're not going to be using an electric oven stove. It's probably going to be propane or maybe natural gas, I don't know. And while I'm on this subject, really quick, I'm going to say that if you're living off-grid, watch which one of these stoves you buy. Some of them have this little heating element in them that glows cherry red to ignite the burners. And from what I've been able to tell, those things stay on the whole time you're running the oven. And they draw between 200 to 400 watts to heat that little coil. You've got a fairly good current draw heating that coil when it really doesn't need to. Like the oven that we have, I bought it just in case we ever do want to go back off grid. It's got an igniter that just ignites, kind of like a piezo igniter. And so it lights the flame and then it shuts off. It's got a sensor, so if it flames out, it shuts the gas off. And I think that's the reason they got that little heating element in there. From what I've been able to understand, is it's a safety feature to where if it flames out, it immediately reignites, so you don't get a big buildup of gas in the oven and have a big boom. So something to keep in mind if you're looking at gas ovens. Make sure you get one that's got the little igniter instead of that heating element in there. Ours, it's got a clock and it's got a little computer in it. I plugged the kilowatt meter into it. 18 watts. It's sitting there drawing 18 watts 24 hours a day. When the igniter goes, it draws a little bit more, but not much. 18 watts, 24 hours a day, 0.43 kilowatt hours. I'm doing math on camera, guys. I'm probably going to screw this up at some point. The other thing is phone chargers. I mean, we all love our smartphones, tablets, whatever. So you got to kind of plug one of those things in to figure out, what's that draw for power? Well, I plugged in a couple of our Samsung chargers, and while the phone's being charged, it's about 35 watts. Let's say it runs 10 hours a day. At 35 watts, that's 0.35 kilowatt hours. PCs or Apple, whatever those things are, I think mine draws, when I'm using it, if I'm not using a lot of processor, if I'm using a lot of processor, it bumps way up. And when I'm editing videos, boy, that thing really starts drawing some juice. But on average, it's about 300 watts and 4 hours a day, let's say. 1.2 kilowatt hours. Now let's just stop there. I mean, you can add on to this list all you want, but let's just stop there to keep the rest of the series kind of simple, but you'll get the basic idea. So under this scenario, we've got 7.9 kilowatt hours per day. Okay, cool. We know what our load is. Can we go buy some solar panels now? No! Now, here's the real bummer. Once we figure this out, guess what? You got to figure this out for every month. Because if you're like most of us, that load's going to change. It's not like our radio sites where we've got a known value and it's going to stay pretty much that way. We can figure, like, in the summer, a 20% duty cycle. In the winter, it's down, 1%. In the fall, it's around 5%. In the spring, it's around 5 to 10%. Households are different. Like us, we run a well quite a bit in the summer for irrigating. So, in the summer, our load's going to be different than it is in the winter. We're going to have probably more time watching TV and playing on the computer in the winter. So, you'll see later on in this series where this really comes into play, because we need to figure out how to build a system for our worst case scenario so you'll be happy with it. Or you may decide that during those months that you got that high draw, you're just going to have to run a generator. Or ask Thor to come provide your power. Maybe he was the god of thunder. Where there's thunder, there's lightning, right? So now that we've got that figured out, what are we going to do next? The next part will be batteries. And there'll be a whole lot more, I hate to say it, math involved. This was the simple part. It gets a little more complicated from here on out. And I'll try and break it down as simple as we can, because the next part gets kind of complicated. Well, how complicated? Like I said, we couldn't really get it all covered real well in 7 days. But we'll get there, trust me. Heck, go figure out what your loads are and start writing that stuff down. And I'll try and get that spreadsheet posted. It'll make this whole process a lot easier if you have access to it. There's some online ones that are pretty decent. One thing I haven't found one that really brings it all together, and that's what I tried to do with my spreadsheet. And it's not going to be 100%, but it will sure help you get this narrowed down some. So just to be clear, if you haven't bought anything yet, don't. Not till you see the whole thing. You need the big picture. So hey, thanks for watching. Have a great day. I'll see you on the next one. By golly, subscribe. Hey, how do you like this green thing? Green thing? Green screen thing. I've been playing with it some. Got it just for making these kind of videos. Oh, another learning curve. When I started this video before, I wore a green shirt right here. Yeah, imagine how that turned out.